Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Almost Dropouts podcast. I'm your host, Daivik, and today I have my good friend with me, Aradhya. Aradhya, you want to introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
for sure, man. So my name's Aradhya, like Daivik said. Daivik calls me Eddie usually, so I'll just let him call me Eddie throughout the podcast. But I'm a second year software engineering student at the University of Western Ontario, and I have an intent to pursue a dual degree between software engineering and business administration.
Yeah, and Eddie, as I know him. First of all, there's some new diversity onto this podcast. Not only Waterloo student guy. Guys, I know more people outside of just Waterloo. Go figure. So I decided to bring some diversity. Eddie goes to the University of Western Ontario. Um, and more interestingly, he's actually going to work at Google this summer as an intern. Um, that's going to be an interesting topic to talk about later on.
For sure.
So I guess first off, I think the viewers have heard a lot about Waterloo engineering and some of the experiences people have had in the past. They've heard from Sid and some other friends. So how about let's hear about some of your experiences with Western engineering. How was adjusting to first year? Some side hustles you're doing. I know you're doing the Western Founders Club and other different clubs and time management just in general, balancing everything out.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll just start with, I guess, the adjustment to engineering in first year, because I know for a lot
Yeah.
of like prospective engineering students, as well as a lot of kids who maybe just finished first year now, like it's a big jump, obviously, right? And speaking from my own personal experience, I took like a partial IB program in high school, and so like a lot of people sort of told me that, oh, you take like the IB program, you do some math, you do some physics, you do some chem, you like, bro, first year engineering will be a breeze, nothing to worry about. You've seen everything,
Yeah.
and I can say that sure, like while like taking those higher level courses in high school did help, I think that in a sense, like coming into university, it gave me almost a little bit of a false sense of confidence. In the sense of that I thought like, like I already know everything, whatever. Because everybody sort of told me, right? Like if you come in like really prepared, like it can be okay. Whereas there is like the other side of it where, there's a lot of people telling you, bro, your mark's gonna drop by like 50%. Like forget grades, like you're just trying to pass. And
Yeah.
hearing
Yeah.
like both sides of those stories, I was always just like, man, I don't really know what this is gonna look like, but I guess I'm just gonna try my best and see what happens, right? So when I got to
Mhm.
university, there was obviously like the first couple months, a lot of stuff is like more review, I guess, because professors also know like they need to ease you into things. But then I think what really hit me hard was just like how hard it is having so many courses as well as everything else that you need to start doing for yourself on top of school when you start living alone, right? Um, I
Mhm.
think I think this is probably a common theme for a lot of kids in first year, where that you get homesick a little bit early, especially when res food starts to taste not as good, when you mess up
Good
doing
old
your
res food,
lawn.
man.
Good old res food, yeah. And being like a
Yeah.
vegetarian, like res food was like even harder, just because
Mhm.
like they don't have as many options there, and you mess up laundry for the first time, and all you want to do is just go back home to mom, right? um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I think like in the first couple months, that was sort of like the hard part, like adjusting to. But I think really it's just a matter of getting into your routine, right? Like I remember in my first year, like
Mhm.
in the first like little bit, I would like wake up. I tend to wake up pretty early, so I still maintained that when I got to university. But like I didn't really have a set routine. Like when I got up, how do I get ready for school? Like what time am I
Mhm.
leaving my residence? Always is it the same every time, or when I go to my first class, what am I doing after that class? And I didn't really have like a structure to my days. And
Right.
in not having that sort of structure, I found sometimes like I'm either not getting as much done as I'd like to in a day, or maybe I'm falling a little bit behind on certain things. But it was just a matter of time, and I think this is natural, very natural for everybody when you're going through such a new experience, that it's a matter of time
Yeah.
before you fall into your routine. And the thing is that everybody does fall into their routine, and that's obviously characterized by good habits, bad habits. There's like, that's not to say like one routine is better than the other, but you'll fall into some routine. And for most kids, that
Yeah.
routine is, that's good enough to get you through like a day at university, which all in all, as we all know, can be very hectic. Um,
Yeah.
but I think like once I got into the routine and swing of things, like that's when I started to adjust, and you meet new people and things start to get a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, dude, saying that, what time do I reach my first class? I was like, damn, this guy actually went to classes. That itself is a big statement right there. That just shows you. That just shows you how dedicated Eddie is to the stuff he does, much more than we are. So, but on like that, no, that's a really big point though. Like, setting a routine, first getting into the swing of things, and then once you get into the swing of things, actually learning, okay, this is how I want things to get done. This is the most efficient way to structure out my day. And this is a routine that will get me to the goals I want to achieve. And I know that sounds like, okay, pretty cliche to say, but that's where you have to start adapting. And sometimes you won't be able to, sometimes things are going to come out of nowhere, and that routine is going to break. But at least sort of having a roadmap of how your days will look like is a nice way to start adjusting to the life in university. And I think that's a really big point that you brought up. And I know one of the interesting things was when Eddie was, I guess we can laugh about it now. Eddie was pretty confused about what he wanted to go into. What he wanted to go into after his first year. So unlike in Waterloo, where we choose in first year exactly what degree stream we want to go into. For example, I went to computer engineering. In most other universities, you choose what stream you want to go into after.
And maybe just to give like even more context to this, like even before I went to Western for first year of engineering, I was like beyond, like not sure which one I wanted to take. And basically for example, I applied to like mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo. So like, as Daivik said, you need to pick your discipline in your first year. But like, even after that, I switched my application to systems design engineering, right? Which is like the more general one.
Yeah. This guy, like every day, this guy used to, or every week or every second, like, I don't know, like every second day, every week, this guy used to call me and be like, oh, yo, am I doing the right thing? Should I go into systems? Should I go to mechanical? Should I do like EC? What should I do? And I'm like, my guy, you just have to start looking at where your interests lie. What are you interested in? And just sort of just pick it, honestly. Like after a while, you can start judging every single thing. But at a certain point, you just have to make a decision.
And I speak to it a little bit more in like first year. It's like, I mean, even coming to Western in a general first year, I came in thinking I would end up in mechanical. Just because like, I think that stemmed from when I was growing up. I didn't really know what engineering other than mechanical engineering could even look like. All I knew is that mechanical engineers, like, they sound like real engineers, and civil engineers, I like, no shade, but like I was told not to become one.
Damn, all right.
I'm playing.
10 civils just stop listening.
No.
10 civils just stop living. Thanks, buddy.
No, a lot of my good friends are in civil engineering. No, civil engineering is awesome. But just growing up, I never really like thought about it. It's all just like mechanical engineering is engineering. So then, ironically, like throughout first year, because in first year in a general program, you take courses, all types of courses, right? So, I mean, finally getting that exposure sort of convinced me, like, oh, you know what? Like electrical engineering might actually be really cool. So there was a time I really wanted to be an electrical engineer. For a little like while, I really wanted to be a chemical engineer because like that seemed like really sick. And then Western has like this integrated engineering program, and then I thought about like, man, if I'm like interested in everything, why don't I just take this integrated thing, like where I can learn everything? And then, some people told me like, oh, but then you're like not even an engineer, bro. Like integrated, like what? Like I don't know, but that's a great program. There's lots of different things. So I finally actually ended up settling for software, of all things. Yeah. And I think Daivik, you actually you played like a really big part in that as well, right? Because like, so as Daivik mentioned, like even before I came to university, I would talk to him a lot.
Yeah.
Sort of about, like, so that Daivik is 2 years older than me, right? So I would try to take as many of his experiences and apply those to my own life as much as I could.
Yeah.
And
No, I think one of like the biggest reasons I started pushing you towards software engineering is because I still stick with this to this day. I think if you're confused with what you want to do and you don't mind coding, software engineering is one of the best roles, like best fields you can get into because, of course, granted now, like I said before, like if you don't mind coding and that type of stuff interests you, it's a great field to get into because there's so many jobs and opportunities. Some of the highest paying engineering jobs are in software engineering, and some of the best job security is in software because of the margins these software companies make. So because of that's why I suggested to him that you should consider software engineering. Because if you're doing if you're confused generally about what you want to do in an engineering program and you like coding, then I think that's a great option.
Yeah, and I think like for me, it was never, like I don't know which thing I'd be passionate about. It was always like I'm passionate about everything, so it's so hard to make a decision because of it, right? And like software was like one of those things that before like I finally got pushed and I started putting myself more into it. It was like that out of reach thing, right? Where it's like because like starting to learn how to code is just the hardest thing because once you get going, like you can just keep going.
Yeah.
But like actually, sitting down and starting to learn is the hardest thing. So before I started to learn, it was like, man, I could never be a software engineer. Like, what the heck? I haven't been coding since I was 11. I didn't know Mark Zuckerberg, right? And I think that once I finally, like I had to swallow my ego a little bit, like to, tell myself, no, I can like start coding when I'm like 18, 19 and still be successful, right? Like, it's not like I started becoming a mechanical engineer when I was like 10.
Right.
So in like that same way, when I finally, started learning, I found that, this is actually really, really enjoyable. Because I was like math when I was like growing up, and I saw like, you can apply more theoretical concepts and like software development and all that. So I found like real passion in it. But that being said, like I still really have like a love for things like physics and chemistry even, like because I studied those so much when I was younger. Funny story, Daivik gave me like my first physics lesson like ever.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. Actually, yeah, no, exactly. It's funny you mentioned those physics lessons. I remember teaching this guy momentum back in the day, and after you learn this type, if you're inclined in physics, after you learn this type of stuff, it starts to like click in your head. It seems pretty straightforward and logical, but until you get that click, it's always so hard to grasp. And it was so frustrating. I'm like, why won't it click? And he's asking me so many abstract questions that have nothing to do with momentum because he thinks it does because it hasn't clicked. And I'm like, dude, this has nothing to do with this. This is how you do it. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. But I think, no, exactly. Like, just try to figure out what you want to do, and then just go for it. And honestly, like, I think one of the biggest things I stress to Eddie, and I still believe too, is that if you realize after you do your software engineering degree that you're actually more interested in mechanical stuff, you can still try altering your career path. You're not necessarily completely funneled into being a software engineer. And that doesn't mean, of course, take the time to make your decision. But just know that once you've made that decision, even if down the line you think it's wrong, or if it was a wrong decision, like reevaluate it. And if you really want to switch, you can switch. And just keep that in mind.
Yeah, like a perfect example of that is so like a startup I'm working for right now, the founder of the startup, he basically did his physics undergrad at UCLA, and then he actually did a master's in mechanical engineering also at UCLA, right? And so now, and then he actually, his job out of university was working at NASA as a software developer.
Okay.
And now he's like around 27 years old, and he quit his job at NASA, and now he's a software entrepreneur. And university, he did physics and mechanical engineering. Yeah. So it really goes to show you, like, it really, really does not matter, like, what you study at school. Like, you can end up doing whatever it is you want to do.
And it's just like whatever you study at school will help set you up in a certain career path, but it doesn't necessarily define that career path. That's one thing to keep in mind. Like, you do have the choice to change if you want to.
Exactly. Like I sometimes like I hear like some people I know, right? Like that, like you might be studying something and because of that, you restrict yourself to only, doing things that are related to that, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, like if you're studying software engineering, like no way you're going to get involved with anything that isn't like coding, because like then you're not, growing as a software developer. But if you're interested in stuff other than coding, then there's no real reason why you shouldn't be willing to pursue that,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. And I think a good example is, let's talk about some of the side hustles you're doing at Western. So I know you're deeply into. What did you break this time, bro?
I have a really bad habit of spinning my pencil when I'm like talking and thinking and stuff, and so I like on my thumb, so I just drop it a lot.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. But anyway, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I know like you're part of the Western Founders Club, which is this club on campus at UWO. You want to explain some of the other side hustles you're doing, or first explain, of course, the Founders Club, and then some other stuff you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we can start with sort of like my extracurricular journey in like first year, and I can talk a little bit about how extracurriculars helped me sort of find more of my passions and supported me throughout university. So basically, when I came to Western, before I came to Western, actually, I actually went on a tour at UWO, and there I met the sort of team lead for like the Formula Racing team. And the Formula Racing team like is a hugely mechanical engineering club, and I became so intrigued by that club, and it was actually, ironically, it was actually one big reason why I decided to go to UWO for like this Formula team, which had like that I thought I'd be like super into.
Yeah.
Um, so then I got to Western, and I knew I was joining like this Formula team. And there's like a million clubs on campus, and like obviously I'm sure at University of Waterloo too, there's like a million things to get involved with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a first year, it was like, how the heck do I get involved like with all these different things? Like, what do I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I decided like I need to limit myself to like a couple things, and those things I need to be really passionate about. But I also wanted to make sure that they're different enough that I'm exploring my options, right? Like, because in first year it was important like to learn what it is I like, and then maybe I can commit more when I go into upper years. So I ended up joining like this Formula Club, which is mechanical engineering oriented, and this club called the Western Founders Network,
Yeah.
which was sort of slated as the biggest tech entrepreneurship and business club on campus, which it was. It had like over 300 members, which I thought was like crazy.
That's crazy for a club.
Yeah, no, it was huge. And so basically, as a part of the Western Founders Network, I was a part of a small team of around like 6.
Mm-hmm.
And we were supposed to build like a software startup from scratch. Like that was our job, like for the entire school year. Like we were a small function in this club
Yeah.
to like make a startup, right?
Okay.
And keep in mind that 5 of the 6 of us had never coded in our lives. And it was just like a huge uphill battle, like figuring out what exactly is going on. I'm sure, Daivik, you remember me asking you like what the heck HTML is.
Yeah.
At the beginning of my first year, just because like I'm like, oh, I'm part of this new club. What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was part of that club, and so basically throughout my first year, I was.
Sorry, guys, we had some audio issues. I'm trying to resolve those. I know some previous podcasts have had them. But anyway, okay, let's continue. Let's continue with it. So, we were talking about how what some of the stuff you're doing at the Western Founders Network. You want to continue with that?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said earlier, hopefully it all caught. But I was basically working on developing my coding skills with the Western Founders Network. And the Western Founders Network does like a million different things, but I was just a small function, part of a small function of it in first year. And then I was learning about other engineering stuff with Formula. And then basically by the end of first year, I sort of learned, I'm more into the coding side of things. I was deciding I'm going to go into software engineering, and overall my passion for tech in general was really growing. And as a result of that, I ended up applying to become like the president of this club, Western Founders Network, because I really wanted to be part of something bigger at university, where I'm a part of a group being able to give kids who like me are just ambitious and passionate about learning the same opportunity I got in first year, and just having a big part of having a big hand in being able to provide that opportunity. So I became the president of Western Founders Network in my second year, and like my second year just finished up basically, and that president role has now been passed on to somebody else. But I think overall this year was really a really big growth year for me, just because being only a second year, I was basically, me and my co-president, we were managing 60 plus kids who were either in like first, second, or like third year, right? So I'm basically like in a position where my entire VP team, like they're all like my friends, like they're all like my buddies, like my homies that I'm like talking to like outside of class. But at the same time, like you're also thrown into this leadership position that you need to be somebody who people can look up to in a way, and people can look to for some direction, right? So being in that position, I think, really humbled me, and it gave me a lot of insights into sort of how you can go about being a true leader by example as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
being the one who has the answers to everything. Because I mean, everybody on my team was like 10 million times better than me at something, right? Like, it's not like I'm in this position because I am the best. No, no, no. That's like the complete wrong way of thinking about it. It's like
Yeah.
I'm in this position just because like this is sort of what worked out, and I am sort of willing to give my time to fulfill the roles of this position. That's all it is, right? And just
Mm-hmm.
realizing that even though I have this like title and I'm in this leadership position, how I am really a servant to the people who are a part of the club, right? Like
Right.
I need to do whatever I can to make sure that the people who are a part of this club can fulfill their own visions and grow as well. Because I mean, I'm growing in like
Yeah.
the position I'm in doing that. And I need to make sure that
Yeah.
other people are growing as well. And just
Yeah.
having that leadership experience, I think early on really gave me a lot of perspective on things. And like, I'm looking forward to
Mm-hmm.
seeing like where I guess that'll take me in my upper years. But that's definitely a lot of work. But it was very fulfilling and very humbling to be a part of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And I think, yeah, I think like you nailed on the head there. Like the biggest thing with university clubs in general, and it's one thing I was talking to Vibe about in like previous podcasts, was just you want to give people the experience that they want to get out of the club.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like as a president, I think the goal, or like at least I interpreted the goal, is that you want to be able to offer as many experiences as possible to these people, to the members of the club, so they can get as much as they want out of it.
Yeah.
And making that possible is the big goal in the leadership position. So
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. Like you just want to be like a source of energy, right? Like you want people to be
Mm-hmm.
excited about the vision. You want people to be excited about what the club is doing. And at the end of the day, like the club is just like a platform. Really, you want to be
Mm-hmm.
on an individual level. You want to be able to talk to anybody. And really just like a lot of time just geek out about like tech and sort of everything that the club stands for. Um,
Yeah.
and it's really just about like meeting people, man. It's just a really great opportunity. Like getting involved with clubs and extracurriculars in general. It's a really good
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to meet great people and join the right community for you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I guess okay. Let's transition a little bit. So a lot of these you learn a lot of the different things. You did some hustling work on the side. The president of Western Founders Network, and that all led up to your Google interview, and now your subsequent position as an intern at Google. So let's talk about that. How is getting a job at Google? Some process, some tips, of course, without violating any NDA stuff. Um, some of the stuff you're excited to work on. Let's talk about Google.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, okay, it's an interesting story because unlike I think like most people who want to get into tech recruiting, especially after their first year, I actually did not. I didn't like go super hard on like like the traditional leak code and sort of getting ready for these interviews like at all like in the summer before, because really like I was still a little bit like confused about exactly what it was that I wanted, right? Like, so as we talked about before, I didn't really even know that I was going to do software engineering until later in my first year. And I also just didn't really have, much of an idea of like what tech recruiting really even looks like. Not to like throw shade at UWO, I guess, but like in first year, they didn't do that great of a job of helping like first year students see like what different job opportunities could look like in different fields. And I guess
Yeah.
that's part of what you get in being in a general program. Like you don't get like the same level of, I guess targeted support for your industry because
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows what your industry is yet, right? Um,
Right. Yep.
so in that, like, I didn't really know, like I didn't even know like you could apply to Google in like September like of 2019, right? Like for working in summer of 2020 and stuff like that. So um, getting a job at Google was just sort of something. Again, you'll this will be a common theme that comes up, but I asked Daivik for a lot of advice. So come September, I messaged Daivik and I'm like, dude, what what is like tech recruiting and like what should I apply for and like how does this stuff work, right? And I'm sure Daivik remembers that very
Yeah.
clearly. um,
Yeah.
and so I mean at that point though, like when September came, I sort of thought to myself like, okay, you know what, like I want to go into tech. I'm not 100% sure. Like, I want to end up working at a place like Google or Facebook or like even at a company in general. Before my second year started, I had already done two internships, one after grade 12 and one after my first year, at a place called General Dynamics, which is pretty close to a tech company. It's a military contractor. And so I got to see a lot of, like what like a 9 to 5 like kind of looks like and sort of what
Mm-hmm.
you might be expected to do on a job. And to be honest, while I learned like a lot, like I was starting to realize like, maybe like corporate at the very least is like not for me, or at least my mind was starting to go towards entrepreneurship more, right? Like as like an option and something that
Mm-hmm.
would be really great to pursue. And so
Mm-hmm.
because of that, like I was sort of swayed away from the, oh man, I just gotta get a job at like Fang, like a every other kid who I knew,
Yeah.
right? Like
And just to give some context, if you don't know what Fang is, Fang's like a short term. A lot of comp sci kids and computer engineering, like software kids, give for the four big companies, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix. Or sorry, five big companies: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. This
yep.
is like a short term for that. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah. So I guess like I was like Fang never really, felt like a dream for me because I guess like working at Fang wasn't like a dream or anything like when I was like a kid. So just because it's a dream for other kids, like should it be a dream for me now? Like I was just confused about like what my goals were, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so what I ended up realizing though, like come September, I was like, whether or not I end up working at one of these companies full time later, or whether like, I this is like the thing I want to do with my life, there's no doubt that I can get some really great experience working here. I'm definitely
Yeah.
passionate about software development. And I remember talking to you I remember very clearly having a discussion with you about this. And you said like, bro, like whether you get this job or not, like if you get it, that's great. It's like really good experience. You might like it, you might hate it. And if you don't get it, that's also great because you can just like do whatever you want. Like it's not that big a
Yep.
deal at all, right?
Yep.
And so because of that, I was like, okay, well, I mean, there's no harm in applying for this kind of stuff. So I might as
Yeah.
well, just like throw out as many applications as I can, um, and just see what happens. Like I started preparing for like technical interviews, in a sense as well. I bought some Udemy courses. I started doing leak code questions in class. And I sort of got on that grind a little bit earlier in September, and I sort
Mm-hmm.
of just like made it my goal, part of my goal at least, that I need to. It wasn't like a do or die mentality, that a lot
Yeah.
of kids maybe take to this, but it was sort of like, I have this opportunity in front of me, and I like to think of myself as like an opportunity grabber. Like whenever I know there's a great opportunity in front of me, I want to I want to make sure I'm doing my best to take the most of what I can. So I
Yeah.
just tried my hardest when it comes to like learning all this material that I hadn't learned before. And so I know you asked a little bit earlier, like if we could talk a little bit about like tips and stuff when it comes to this all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like no, like I'm not like a leak code expert or anything, and like I mean, like I still have like a
Yeah.
lot to learn, and like preparing for technical interviews is like really hard. Um, but I think the second that I sort of told myself that I can do this, and like I imagined myself being able to work at a company like Google and like passing the interview, like when I told myself I
Mm-hmm.
can do that, like then everything just sort of got easier, right? Like at the end of the day, it's all like standard material that everybody who works at one of these companies, and pretty much like Fang gets a lot of notoriety, but like if you go work at any tech company, like you have to know this stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
sure, like the interviews and stuff aren't like as famous or anything, but like this is like important material that you need to know. And just like that, it's just like school, like you're just like studying for a class, right? So you start
Yeah, I
studying, you
think
start learning.
yeah, I think one of the things I try highlighting when you were asking me a bunch of those questions in the past was take like you have to take advantage of whatever opportunity you get.
Yeah.
And what that means is don't put all your eggs into one basket. Like, of course, apply for everything, right? Like, apply for the Google's Fang, and work your ass off and trying to achieve those for sure. But if you don't achieve it, you still have other opportunities you can take. It's not the end of the world, and I know that's like something people are going to be like, of course, but I know a lot of kids tunnel vision onto this type of stuff. And
Oh yeah.
when they don't achieve, like if you don't get an internship 1 year, start working on some other stuff to build up like a portfolio for the next year or to help with your chances for the next time. It's not you have so many other things you can do. And it doesn't just have to be that. And I think part of that problem is that so many kids have their goals to be to like go to these FANG companies that there's like a crowd mentality that even people who might not actually want to work at FANG or have no preference also get in this mentality that they have to go to Cali, they have to work at FANG. It's you have to make sure you're discerning, like just making a distinction for yourself between what do I actually want and what am I doing because other people want it so much. So that was the first thing I
Yeah.
sort of laid out when you were asking me a lot of this question. And the second thing, specifically with the Google interviews or any FANG interview, is you have to like make sure you know your data structures and algorithms if you're doing software engineering. And I assume most of the people who are applying for Google and stuff are going for software engineering internships. So make sure you know all your stuff. But at a certain point, you also have to look beyond just using that knowledge. It's about applying that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They're never gonna. Well, it depends. It depends on which internship you're applying for. Like, for example, you apply for the step one, so it's not as. It might be a little more straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, there's going to be some more abstract questions too. It's not going to be most of the time. The whole interview isn't going to be like, okay, what is this data structure? What is that data structure?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be like you have this issue. Use any steps anything in your toolkit you have to solve the issue,
Mm-hmm.
and that is where that knowledge you have, that base knowledge you have, is used to solve that problem. I think one thing, like one really interesting part of it, that's what engineering problems really are. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
comes up to you and is like nobody comes up to you is like, yo, find the angular velocity of this thing in the work environment, right? It's like we have this issue. How do you solve it? And then you start using the physics in order to build something, or you start using your coding experience in order to start building something to solve that issue. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, man. Like the way you just said about like the engineering problems thing, I wish I don't know if you guys get at Waterloo, but like I mean at Western, like the questions we get asked like on our tests and stuff, like they're like pretty straightforward, right? Like
yeah,
when it comes to, like the class material, it's usually like direct applications of what you've learned. But like to me, it's always like to really learn something, especially like on a test, like I find like I learn like a lot, like when I end up like writing my engineering tests, is that like I want to see questions that I've like never seen before, right? So like instead of seeing, like you said, I don't know, find the angular velocity of this thing or like directly apply this concept that I taught you in class to like solving this
yeah.
exact problem you did in the textbook, like I don't know, like ask me like how much like rocket fuel do you need to like go to Mars, bro? Or like it was like
Bro,
I don't know. That was like random, but like
I can tell you from experience. So a lot of Waterloo exams are like this, and it's not fun when you're doing it on an exam because you are. It is very different when you're at work and somebody gives you a problem versus when you're in a like super stressful 1 hour time limit. This is what you have. Like at that point, it's so hard to think creatively of how to solve something because you're so
That's
focused
fair.
on getting the right answer and passing.
That's fair.
Um, so it's very different. I mean, fair enough. Like, of course, you can have whatever preference you want for a test, but as somebody who can vouch for Waterloo questions, which are used with that type of application, it is not fun doing that on a test, man.
That's fair. That's
um,
fair. I don't know. I also just find it like I find it like really peculiar how like with like some of the like tests I write and everything. It's like like I don't sometimes I don't like see a difference between the difficulty level of like what I'm like doing in like university versus like what I might have been doing like earlier on, right? Like it just like
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like, man, it should like I wish this was like a little bit harder and all that stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's just random.
All right. Hashtag Western thoughts. I've never once thought in EC Waterloo, I wish this was harder. Ever. I'm like, even if a test is easy, which is like maybe once in my degree, I'm like, thank you God for giving me this blessing of a sort of easy test. But anyway, okay, going back to Google. I know one of the other things, like along with knowing how to apply that knowledge, is also at a certain point, it's not only about solving the problem; it's about how you approach the problem and the way what you're thinking, what your thoughts are, and how you approach breaking the problem down to solve it. And one of the biggest tips I think for the Google interview that I conveyed to you, and I think like you can tell me if this is useful or not, was explain your thought process to the interviewer. At every like, so then they are in the loop exactly what you're thinking about. If you're just going to be silent for like 10 minutes while you're solving it, and then come up with the wrong answer, they have nothing to base, uh, to judge you on or to base your interview on. They
Yep.
only have that wrong answer.
Yep.
Um, but
Yep.
if you explain your thought process, then they know, okay, this is how this guy approached it, and this is where he might have gone astray. And is that okay at Google or not? Because, like, like you're not necessarily you might not necessarily solve a problem correctly at the first time, but are you approaching that solution correctly?
Yep.
But I love to hear like your thoughts on that during the interview and just in general.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important that, you know, you're talking throughout the interview and you're explaining your thought process. I haven't done like many other technical interviews, but one thing that I found challenging about the Google interview that I didn't really know like what to expect about was that since it's not like they don't do their, you know, there's technical intern interviews like in person. Usually, it's usually
Mm-hmm.
all like over the phone, whether you apply for STEP, whether you apply for SWE, and because of that, like it's not like you have a whiteboard marker. No, you're like
Yeah.
in a Google Doc, and so you know those crucial moments before you start writing the code, where you're figuring out how you're going to go about solving this problem instead of having the free flow of being able to write everything out. You're sort of having to whiteboard on like a Google Doc, and that was like one thing that was like pretty unnatural to me. Like, like for
Yeah.
example, if I need to like draw out like arrows and like make like a linked list or something, it's like it's weirder trying to do that on like the Google Doc as opposed to like on like a whiteboard. And that was something that took like a little bit getting used to. But like even though that felt like unnatural, just as I was, talking out loud and explaining exactly, what I was trying to do with or trying to convey with whatever the heck I was doing on the Google Doc. Um,
Yeah.
I think that gave like the interviewer like more reassurance that okay, like maybe this guy kind of knows what he's talking about a little bit, and then you just keep going, right? Like as long as you keep like
Mm-hmm.
some sort of cohesive train of thought and you're able to communicate effectively, because I think that's like a point that maybe a lot of people miss is that they're not just looking at like your ability to think, they're looking at your ability to communicate, because like in the actual workplace they're not like nobody really cares if you're like the smartest guy in the room if like you can't help anybody solve a problem because you can't communicate
Yep.
it effectively, right? So they're looking at
Mm-hmm.
like your ability to not only solve this problem but to communicate the solution to somebody else. So
Yep.
both are very important factors.
Mm, exactly, and that like you were saying, communicating that your approach to the issue is really important. And I think on a more technical basis, I think some of the more valuable technical knowledge to know, at least I and you can vouch for this once again. But knowing some O of one ways of implementing stuff. For example, dictionaries are really important
Yeah, yeah.
uh, because you can just search up directly at the key. Like you can search up items values straight by using the key in a dictionary.
Yep.
So you don't have an O of n or time at that. In using that, you have O of one. So knowing different tips like that and tricks like that of how do I reduce my runtime, how do I make sure I don't get ON squared, because that's definitely usually the or ON cubed in some cases. That's definitely something you have to look out for.
Yeah.
Um,
Saying that though, like, bro, like the entire interview thing, like what I've realized, it's a lot of it's like it's very much like a game, right? Because like, for example, like so like you just said, like it's good to know like some tips and tricks and like know the O1 stuff. But, like for example, like I don't know, let's say you got asked about like Fibonacci, like some crazy problem that has to do with Fibonacci numbers, and like you just basically cheat the solution because you like have memorized the formula for like O1 of Fibonacci, just like input output, right? And like
yeah,
it's like something to do with the golden ratio. It's like some random thing. And then the interviewer just like looks at you or like just thinks like, well, shit, like this guy just like some memorized some random thing, and they didn't like learn anything about your problem solving skills. So like sometimes you got to play the game where you like start with like the brute force solution that might be like n squared or like not great big O, and then sort of like you iteratively like even though you might have known the best solution from the beginning, like
yeah,
say like the bad solution first and then sort of like go like, oh wait, but like if we change this and improve upon this way, we can actually get
yeah,
to the O of n time and like use a dictionary and it's like so much better. And then like, oh, but I actually know this really cool thing that like you can just put in this formula and it's like O of 1 and like I'm sick. Right? Like
yeah, yeah,
you got to play the
yeah,
game sometimes too.
yeah. I think, and I think some of this, a lot of this interest, some of this interest is also in like luck as well. Like with the
Oh
Google one, you
yeah.
get two
Oh
random
yeah.
interviewers,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
three if the first two can't decide. And I mean, they can give you any question. I don't know how the evaluation process is at Google, but
Dude, yeah.
based
Like
on
it's
what I've heard,
all so much luck.
like it really depends who you get. Of course, now if you're like a genius, you have everything down, you can solve any problem, then of course it doesn't matter who comes in front of you, you'll be able to solve the hardest problems. But like sometimes if you talk with other people and I guess see what their questions they were asked were, and then you look at the questions you were asked, you might be like, what the hell?
Man,
Like,
yeah, it's crazy. And like here, I just like being as transparent as I can about like this kind of stuff because I know when I was looking up to in like first year and like it looked like somebody got a job at Google, like if they tried to make themselves look like really sick and stuff and like, oh, I'm so cool because I got a job at Google, like to me I was like that sort of like made me anxious for some reason and I don't want to like I hate to like see that kind of stuff happen, right? So it's
yeah,
like the luck thing is like huge, right? Like, and an example of that is like I got really lucky, and how that happened was when I applied to Google, I applied so you can apply for like three roles at once, and I applied for like the step role in the U.S., the step role in like Canada, and like I think I applied for like the SWE role in like Berlin or something. I don't know.
in Berlin. All right, trying to make a Europe trip out of your internship, buddy.
I have no clue, but I think like I either applied like too early or too late for something, and like that's why like I ended up applying for Berlin, whatever, right? Like
Okay, yeah,
so
yeah,
the main ones I applied for were like STEP in Canada and like STEP in the US. And so basically what ended up happening was like when I had like all my interviews and everything, like um I thought everything went like really well. And like by the end of like my like final interview, like I was like fairly confident that, you know what, like I think I got it, right? And
mhm,
so I actually got an email and a call from my recruiter that I did not get the job. And I actually have the email. Like I have the email that says, sorry, like we cannot accept you this year. And like it's sort of like the rejection email from Google. And,
yeah,
and right. And so like when that happened, like I was kind of like devastated in the sense of like I had sort of like thought that it went really well and I didn't really understand like why like it didn't work out. And obviously
mhm,
like they can't like provide that sort of feedback, right?
mhm,
Um, and immediately when that happened, I don't know if like I was more crushed or like I got really motivated to do something. I don't know. I was just like I sort of like bit my tongue and sort of just like went back to work, but I knew like deep down inside like it kind of like sucked.
yeah,
But like what ended up happening though, like 3 hours after I got the call from my recruiter that I didn't get it, I actually got an email from her like, "Hey, I saw that you applied for U.S. roles as well. Are you still interested?" And
yeah,
then I was just like, "Wait, what?" And like, so I emailed her back, and she was like, "Yeah, you can call me too." And I called her, and like, she couldn't pick up that day, so I was like left hanging on this like, oh, why she emailed me back about like US roles, right?
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening, like I had a conversation with her the next day, and basically like all the Canadian roles, like first, since I'm Canadian, they like looked at me for Canada first, and like most of the Canadian projects were already filled out for STEP, just because like Canada is obviously much smaller than the US.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, like they just couldn't offer like their last or like second last position to me. But like since they just had so many more in like the US, she was like, oh, like thank God you applied to the US, because like the interview team would like love to like sponsor you for like a US internship. And I was just like, yo, hallelujah, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
God's plan, bro. It's like when Drake was handing out a bunch of money in Miami, that recruiter was like, yo, I'm gonna do my own God's plan out here, man.
Bro, exactly. But like, and I just want like people to like see like how much luck was involved in that. Like, if my recruiter like could have like not given a shit, and like there's a lot of like a lot of stories I've heard where like, you know, like recruiters might not have been like that great to work with, and it was like hard to, you know, navigate the entire process. But my recruiter saw that, oh, first he applied to the Canadian thing, he couldn't get there, but like maybe he can get US sponsorship. And then she went back to like my sponsorship team, and she was like, oh, but what do you guys think about the US? And like she did so much, and like I got really lucky with getting such a great recruiter, right? There's just so much involved with this stuff, and it's like, I mean, if there's one thing that I could say, it's just like, even if like Fang and all of this is like, you know, sort of to you like the end all be all, I need to get a job here or else I will die. I'd say like you can't let it be the sole driver of like everything that you do, because there's certain things that like aren't in your control when it comes to this. You can maximize your chances of getting into stuff like this, but there's no guarantee ever. And like you said before, Daivik, it's like if you put all your eggs into one basket and that basket just sort of falls apart, you're sort of screwed in a way, and you don't want that to happen, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. For sure. I think that's a pretty good overview of the whole interview process, some of the stuff you went through, and some of the tips that we have. I think a good segue is, where does Google fit into your grand scheme of things, and just in general for the future, what are your plans?
Man, those are big questions.
Yeah, I mean, okay, you're 2 years younger than me, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So, like, I know, it's like I really shouldn't be putting that on you, but you know, hey man, you came on the podcast. I'm asking the questions.
No, it's good to talk about for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll start with I guess how I think Google like fits in with the grand scheme of things. It's like I said before, I think right now I just see these sort of opportunities as like great experience. You know, whether or not I'd want to work at Google like for the rest of my life, which obviously like for a lot of people that's worked out really well. It seems like a really cool company, or whether, you know, I don't know, like maybe I do the work at Google this summer and like I hate it, and like I don't want to work there ever again. Like nobody knows what's going to happen, right? So for me, all I know is that it's going to be a great experience for me to see like huge code bases, see like large complexity and like big applications, and sort of like get working on like big software projects that I haven't really had the exposure to before, right? Yeah. So in knowing that, I know that in the grand scheme of things, it's going to give me new perspectives, and it's going to obviously open up more opportunities in the future, I'd say. I think that's like one thing that is also pretty like pretty nice side effect that comes with, you know, getting like a name like Google onto your resume. Mm-hmm. So in like the grand scheme of things, it's like, okay, like I've had this cool experience now. I'll probably learn some cool things, and we'll see like where that can lead me to. Mm-hmm. But like to answer your question about like what do I actually like really want to do, like I think for me, I'm pretty dead set on like a path in entrepreneurship in some way, and mm-hmm. like being a part of like Western Founders Network, working for a startup right now. I've been working for the same startup for like 7 months, and like just been hearing so many stories of like, you know, like this guy who like quit his job, like working as a software developer at NASA to like do his own thing, right? Like that's insane to me. It's like, you know, I like a year ago, I could have imagined working at NASA as like a software developer for like the rest of my life, and that's like the coolest thing in the world. Yeah. But like this is a guy who always knew he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He got there, and then he just quit because that wasn't for him, right?
Right.
And it just made me realize that if I have an itch to be an entrepreneur right now, that's not something that's just going to go away. Like when I start working at Google full time, or when I start, like just working at like a really cool company. No, like
Yeah.
if I have an itch for, that sort of risk, that sort of ambition, and just making your own thing out of nothing, it's just so enticing in sort of like a dreamy sort of way, right?
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, I think like I'm trying to get involved with as many entrepreneurial things as I can, like right now. I think this would be a good time to start talking a little bit about like maybe like business that you and I are working on together, Davik, when it comes to entrepreneurship and this product development stuff.
Yeah, I think okay, the preface before, I think me and Eddie are really on the same page about this. Like I'm also very keen on entrepreneurship. Um because like you were saying, just the ability to put something from your mind into the world. Like I think that's a big uh very exciting thing for me. And I've always wanted to do it. I've always been very keen about entrepreneurship since I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um and so of course things can change. Like I don't know what's going to happen in the next year, 6 months, even hell, I don't even know where I'm going to be in the next month. Um, but but based on where I am right now, I really believe that it's a path that I want to pursue in the future, and I think I should pursue, especially when I'm young, because I know a lot of people, and me and Sid had a long conversation about this as well. You can check it out, episode 3. But I think especially when we're young, when we don't have like my parents are well off, your parents are well off, like we don't have any financial burdens, and we can really take more of a risk. I think it's really important we take that risk right now,
Wow.
because in the future
Dude,
it becomes a
totally.
lot harder. Like, of course, you'll have more experience under your belt, and honestly, your startup has a higher chance of succeeding because you can navigate the industry a little better when you're older. But at the same time, there's so many other factors that get involved in how much more complicated it becomes, because you might have a wife, family, kids, like all of that. Keeping all of that in check at that time just becomes so much harder compared to doing a startup when you're 22. And if it fails, what's the worst case scenario? You do a normal job and have to live with your parents for a couple months. That's not a bad worst case, right?
Yeah, dude, no, like it's so important that since we have the ability to take that risk, that, like we go for it, because if we make it, then well, shit, we made it. But if we
Yeah,
don't, then it's like, well, you're still like a college student and you're still navigating life, right?
yeah, and I understand. Like I understand being an entrepreneur is very stressful, and there's a lot of stuff
Oh yeah, of course.
that comes with it. But like I've had since now that I've had 6 internships, I've loved my internships, especially this recent one at Tesla. But that hasn't really, at least right now, hasn't really taken away from my desire to do my own entrepreneurial venture in the future.
Yep.
Because as much as I've enjoyed those jobs, I just know that it isn't it for me, and that might just be me being foolish. For sure, it could be, but I gotta just trust my heart and my gut. Um, and right now, that my gut is saying to go for entrepreneurial ventures. So my plan right now um, is I have 3 more co-op terms left, including the summer. So we'll see what happens for the summer. But to gain that industry experience and then utilize that to do a startup in the future. Um, that's
Dude,
that's
yeah.
my plan. But now that you brought the thing you brought up at the end there, me and I guess this is a little unveiling if you got this far into the podcast, but we're working on a new application, like an idea that we have. I don't know how deep we want to get into it until like a proper rollout. So I would say stay tuned for it. I think we'll do a proper rollout in the future, but you know what? Like even if
Yeah,
it
for
just
sure. I think it's a good segue to start talking about like voice technologies, because just like I guess like as a sneak peek, it's like we're really excited about like voice technologies and voice assistants, and like the future of VUIs versus like GUIs
yep, yep,
in the future. And so I think it's a good chance to maybe talk a little bit about where we think voice user interfaces play in the
for
future.
sure. Like Raj is saying, so the application we're building is in voice user interfaces and mixing that with the GUI, and just in general, like I'm very firmly of the belief that voice user interfaces in the next 10 years are going to explode in popularity and become even more important. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be a big industry. And I think right
Yep.
now the setting, we see it getting set up with Siri, with Google Assistant becoming ever so more, and Alexa becoming ever so more pervasive in your house, in your car, in your day-to-day life. It's going to become much, much more important for a voice user interface for any application, especially when people become more comfortable with it and becomes a mainstream technology. Um, it is a mainstream technology right now, but we're at the very beginning of it. And that's why with this entrepreneurial venture that me and Eddie are doing, the reason, like at least one of the reasons I'm doing it, and I assume that's one of the reasons you are as well, is because if we tap into that right now, we can be on the upward trend when it becomes a mainstream
Yep.
thing. And I think that will happen in the next 1 or 2 years. So it's very important to start right now.
Yep. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's like, as we sort of got more into this idea and I started doing like more reading about it, it was really interesting to find that when like human computer interfaces were sort of coming to actual fruition, like people actually thought first that voice user interfaces were going to be the mainstream, and like back in like the 19 like I guess it would be like the 90s or like 2000s and stuff. It's like people didn't imagine like GUIs becoming as big as they did, and people actually thought that voice user interfaces would be the mainstream thing. And obviously, like things didn't work out that way, but the way technology has evolved now, and with NLP and AI obviously becoming more and more robust every single
Mm-hmm.
day, real natural voice user interfaces. I'm not going to say the ones like, I don't know, you see in like the Avengers with like Jarvis and Ultron. But that being said, like real voice user interfaces that like you could use on a daily basis. I mean, we already see like Siri and all of that,
Yeah.
but like an actual proper like assistant,
Yeah.
like that's like pretty close to coming to like reality. And like I mean, like things like general artificial intelligence and all of that jazz. That's like a separate
Yeah.
conversation. But just like with all the technological advancements in like these fields, we're gonna start adopting this technology a lot faster than like people think, and like it's happening right now.
Yep.
And so I think that lots of companies are gonna come out, and we've already seen it like with like the AI trend, like the million AI companies sprouted, like who knows out of where, like in the past like 5 years.
Yep.
Um, but with like all the new technologies like on the rise, you're just going to see so many new companies sprouting up to take advantage of the trend. So whether that's like voice technologies, whether that's like CRISPR, whether that's like quantum computing, there's like a million different things like you can list that are being evolved right now that you're going to need companies to make use of.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think at the end of the day, the end of any voice assistant is to become a natural conversation for the user, where the user doesn't have to necessarily think that, oh, I have to, I'm talking to a voice assistant. Or beyond that, it becomes as easy for a user to do a voice command or use a voice assistant as it would be for them to interact on a GUI. It should be actually faster. That's the ideal goal, because a voice assistant is you don't have to even pick up your phone. But at least to get to a point where they're both at an equal playing field. And that's one of the things, like I have an article about ways Apple should improve Siri, and that's some of the stuff I talk about. That's the domain that Siri has to get to in order to compete, or any voice assistant has to get to in order to become a viable option for customers. And we see that happening with NLP and AI advancing every single day. We're getting to a point where that will happen. And at that very moment, I think we
Yep.
will see so many customers move to voice user interface. And I think at that very moment, we'll see so many and a huge increase in the amount of voice user interface applications and startups coming
Yep.
up.
Yeah, for sure. Like just picture things like this, man. Like everybody like is already like wearing AirPods all day, right? Like people are walking around like with like AirPods in their
Yeah.
ears. So it's only like a matter of time before, like, and I mean, there's so many AirPods like knockoffs. Like, dude, like imagine like, I don't know, like Amazon like can hear you cough while you have like your AirPods on or something. And like they somehow play an advertisement for you on your AirPods for like, I don't know, like cough syrup or something. Like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like the whole like human to like cloud interface. And it's not just like a computer interface anymore. It's really the
Yeah.
cloud. It's like how are we as humans interacting with like the whole web like these days, right? And like that's where the whole brain computer interface comes to play. But before that, I think it's going to be, stuff like ears. Um, how are these things just going to evolve over time? And I mean, it's going to be like over probably the next decade because the technology's there. It's like a question of like how it's going to get, I guess, adopted by like society,
Yeah.
and like what's going to be considered like okay, what's not okay. Privacy issues have all obviously been on the
Yeah. Yeah.
rise recently. That's a really big deal. So much
And
so.
I think, it's interesting what you just said. Like, if you cough and Amazon gives you an ad for cough syrup, I can tell you right now, I guarantee a lot of people right now are shitting themselves. Like, what the hell did you just say? I don't want that, man. I don't want that. But
It's happening.
That's what Eddie's saying. Like, and it's a good time right now to be part of the first generation of people to define the direction that goes into. And I'm not saying we're advocating Amazon
No,
suggesting a cough syrup in your AirPods and you cough. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you want to define an industry, it's a good time to get into it. Like, for example, like of course there was MySpace and other industries or other social media conglomerates before Facebook, but Facebook really took the step to completely define the whole social media industry to where we are right now. And I think with voice assistant technology, and not only technology, not like only Alexa, Siri, and Google Assistant, because those are on the separate domains, but applications that leverage those technologies for customers, I think this is the time to get in before it really blows up. But it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, stay tuned for this application. If not, it's just a cool side project for me and Aradhya to work on. But you should hear some more news about that soon. I think there's a lot more we can discuss, but I think we should save that for another episode, just so this one doesn't get too long. I know you're really interested in product management, and so am I. So I would love to have an episode with us sometime in the near future where we talk about product, because now we've had an introduction of your time at Google and stuff like that. So I think it'd be nice to go straight into product management. But I think let's save that for a future episode.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I mean, I guess I just want to thank you for having me on the podcast, man. This, I mean, with everything that's like going on, I know we haven't really had the opportunity to chat as much, but like, I think this was like a really enticing conversation. And while we always like talk about like tech, and while we're always talking about new startup ideas and all of that, I think this was like a really great reflection, I guess, on sort of the experiences that led us to where we are today. And I think this was a really great conversation.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I hope this was useful for people. And if not, I hope you enjoyed two buddies just chatting it up. But definitely stay tuned. I will definitely have Eddie back, and we're going to have that full product management episode as well. I'm definitely looking forward to that. But yeah, that's my friend Aradhya. I hope you enjoyed the experiences. And we'll see you soon. Stay tuned for the next episode soon. Take care, guys.